The fortifications exist. They span continents. They share a design language so uniform, so mathematically precise, that attributing them to scattered pre-industrial kingdoms raises more questions than it answers. Star forts, bastion fortifications, with their razor-edged geometric projections, emerge across Europe, Asia, the Americas, and North Africa within an impossibly compressed timeline. The official narrative assigns them to the age of gunpowder, to Renaissance military engineers responding to cannon warfare. But stand inside the walls of Bourtange in the Netherlands, trace the perfect angles of Palma Nova in Italy, walk the bastions of Fort McHenry in America or the Citadel of Lille in France, and a different story begins to surface. These are not crude adaptations. These are expressions of an engineering philosophy that transcends the supposed limitations of their era. And the architects? History names a few. Vauban in France, Menno van Koeghorn in Holland, Francesco de Marchi in Italy. But these men did not invent the principles, they inherited them. From whom? That question leads into a darkness historians prefer not to illuminate. In 1683, the siege of Vienna ended with Ottoman forces retreating after months of encirclement. The city's defenses, modified star bastions with ravelins and counterscarps, held against an army numbering over 100,000. Walk through the Hofburg archives today, and you will find detailed engineering blueprints dated decades before the siege. Diagrams so precise they include calculated firing angles, overlapping fields of fire, and geometric projections that require advanced trigonometry. The engineers who drew them were working with mathematical principles that would not be formally codified in European universities for another generation. Trace the lines on those yellowed papers and you see something unsettling. The designs are not experimental. They are refined. They are the product of a long, invisible lineage of knowledge that appears fully formed in the historical record without precursors, without the fumbling iterations that characterize genuine technological development. These blueprints do not look like innovations, they look like instructions. The mathematics embedded in star fort design require understanding of angular geometry, ballistics, earth mechanics, and spatial optimization. Each bastion projects outward at calculated angles to eliminate dead zones, spaces where attackers could shelter from defensive fire. The Trace Italienne, as it was called, was not a military fashion. It was a system so effective that it rendered medieval curtain walls obsolete overnight. But here is the anomaly. The transition was not gradual. In the early 1500s, European fortifications were still dominated by high stone walls and round towers. By the mid-1500s, star forts were being constructed from Ireland to Poland to the Ottoman frontier. The speed of adoption suggests not innovation, but dissemination, the spreading of existing knowledge rather than the invention of new techniques. And dissemination implies a source, a reservoir of expertise that multiple kingdoms drew from simultaneously. Who maintained that reservoir? The records do not say, or rather, the records that might say have been carefully edited. Travel to the New World and the pattern intensifies. Fort San Felipe del Morro in Puerto Rico, Castillo de San Marcos in Florida, Fort Jesus in Mombasa. These are not European designs transplanted to colonial soil. They are perfect expressions of the star fort system built in environments where European military engineering should have been logistically impossible. Consider the timeline. The Spanish arrive in the Caribbean in the late 1400s. By the 1500s, they are constructing fortifications that require quarried stone, lime mortar, precise surveying equipment, skilled masons, and engineering knowledge that most European cities did not yet possess. The official story claims these forts were built to defend against rival colonial powers. But the uniformity of design suggests a different priority. These fortifications were not experiments in local defense. They were nodes in a global network. A network that predates the colonial powers who claim to have built it. The acoustics inside star forts are impossible to ignore. Stand in the center courtyard of Fort Bourtange and speak in a normal voice. Your words carry to the corner bastions with unnatural clarity. The walls are angled in such a way that sound reflects and focuses inward, creating a natural amplification system. This is not coincidental. The geometry that eliminates blind spots for defensive fire also creates acoustic channels, allowing commanders to communicate across distances without runners or signals. But acoustic engineering was not a recognized science in the 16th century. There are no treatises on sound propagation in military architecture from that period. Yet the forts function as if designed by engineers who understood waveform behavior and reflective surfaces. The implication is stark. The minds behind these structures possessed interdisciplinary knowledge that the historical record does not account for. They understood physics in ways that would not be formalized until Newton and beyond. They were not merely responding to the threat of cannon fire. They were implementing a design philosophy developed elsewhere, else when. Examine the labor. Constructing a single star fort required millions of cubic meters of earth to be moved, shaped, and compacted. The bastions are not hollow stone shells, they are massive earthworks faced with stone or brick. The citadel of Lille, completed in 1670, consumed the labor of thousands of workers over years. Vauban's fortifications along the French frontier required entire populations to be mobilized. The scale is medieval in its ambition, but the execution is industrial in its precision. Workers did not simply pile dirt. They engineered compacted ramparts with precise slopes, drainage systems, and revetments designed to absorb cannon impact. This level of coordination implies project management skills, logistical frameworks, and resource allocation methods that rival modern construction efforts. Yet the official record attributes this to feudal monarchies operating with quill and parchment. The disconnection is profound. These projects suggest the existence of an organizational infrastructure, a hidden bureaucracy capable of planning and executing continent-spanning engineering works with military precision. The surveying equipment required to lay out star fort geometry did not officially exist in the forms necessary. The theodolite, the instrument that allows precise angle measurement for complex geometric layouts, was not perfected until the 18th century. Yet star forts were being constructed with mathematical precision decades earlier. The angles are not approximate, they are exact. The bastions align with astronomical precision, their projections calculated to the degree. How were these measurements achieved? Some forts incorporate sight lines that align with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, planetary conjunctions. This astronomical integration suggests that the designers were working with cosmological knowledge, embedding celestial harmonics into terrestrial structures. The implication is that star forts were not merely defensive. They were observational, calendrical, perhaps even ritual. They served multiple functions that the military narrative obscures. And those functions require skills that bridge engineering, astronomy, and hermetic philosophy. Skills that point to a unified body of knowledge, a grand synthesis that Renaissance Europe did not possess in isolation. If you enjoy historical stories about the hidden mysteries of the past, please like this video and leave a comment with 1. If you don't, write 0. This helps us understand how valuable these narratives are to you. The symbol of the star itself demands scrutiny. It predates the fortifications by millennia. Star motifs appear in Sumerian tablets, Egyptian tombs, Celtic standing stones, and Mesoamerican codices. The five-pointed star, the pentagram, is a geometric figure that holds mathematical significance across cultures. It represents the golden ratio, phi, the proportion that governs natural growth patterns and aesthetic harmony. The star fort takes this ancient symbol and weaponizes it, transforming a sacred geometry into a defensive architecture. This is not random. The men who designed these forts were operating within a symbolic language older than their civilizations. They were taking forms encoded in mystery traditions, forms associated with cosmic order, celestial navigation, and Hermetic philosophy, and embedding them into the physical landscape. Why? Defensive necessity does not explain symbolic resonance. A functional fortification does not require geometric perfection beyond what ballistics demand. Yet, star forts are aesthetically, almost obsessively symmetrical. They are not merely functional. They are declarations, markers. And the question that historians avoid is this: markers for whom? The financial cost of these projects should have bankrupted nations. France alone maintained over 150 fortified sites designed or modified by Vauban. Each required ongoing maintenance, garrison troops, and periodic upgrades. The Spanish Empire stretched fortifications across the Americas, the Philippines, North Africa, and the Mediterranean. The Dutch built star forts in Indonesia, South Africa, and the Caribbean. The geographic spread is staggering. The financial burden should have been unsustainable. Yet these empires not only built the forts, they maintained them simultaneously across vast distances. The capital required suggests access to wealth far beyond what taxation and colonial extraction could provide. Some researchers point to hidden financial networks, to banking families and trading companies whose wealth dwarfed royal treasuries. Others suggest that the forts themselves were part of an economic system we no longer understand, nodes in a trade and control grid that predated modern capitalism. Either explanation implies the existence of shadow powers operating behind the thrones, entities with resources and priorities that the official history conceals. The uniformity extends to details that should vary. Visit star forts across continents, and you find identical construction techniques. The same sloped ramparts, the same brick bonding patterns, the same arrangement of magazines and barracks, the same geometric ratios. It is as if the builders were working from a master template, a universal blueprint distributed across the world. In the age before standardized measurements, before international engineering schools, before telegraphs or railways, how did this uniformity emerge? The conventional answer is cultural diffusion. Military engineers traveled, shared knowledge, adapted techniques. But diffusion produces variation. It produces local adaptation. It does not produce the lockstep precision we observe. The star forts look like franchises, identical units of a global architecture deployed according to a central plan. This suggests coordination at a level that no acknowledged institution of the era possessed. It suggests an invisible hand guiding construction, enforcing standards, ensuring that each fort fit into a larger pattern. The question of origin leads back through time to earlier empires. The Romans built fortifications, but their camps were square or rectangular, optimized for rapid construction and standardized legion deployment. The Byzantines inherited Roman techniques, but did not develop bastioned trace. The Crusader castles of the Levant employed concentric walls and towers, but not the star geometry. Then suddenly, in the 1500s, the star fort appears as if downloaded into European consciousness. Some historians trace influences to Islamic military architecture, pointing to the angular designs of Moorish fortresses in Spain. But even these do not fully explain the mathematical sophistication of the star fort. The geometry is too pure, the execution too flawless. It is as if the design emerged from a source that had already perfected it through centuries of refinement. A source that remained hidden while its knowledge flowed into the hands of European engineers. The mystery deepens when you consider that many of the earliest star forts were built on sites of much older fortifications, as if the new structures were not innovations but restorations. Recreations of something that had stood there before and been lost. The documents that survive are fragments. Many of the original engineering treatises were classified as military secrets, restricted to royal courts and high command. Others were lost in wars, fires, and the deliberate purges of archives. What remains are copies, translations, and redactions. Texts that passed through layers of censorship and revision. When you read Vauban's writings, you encounter a man who describes his work with confidence, but rarely explains his reasoning. He presents the star fort as a known system, not a discovery. He refines, he optimizes, but he does not claim to have invented the principles. The same is true of his contemporaries. They write as if the knowledge was already established, as if they were custodians of a tradition rather than pioneers. This is the voice of inheritance, not innovation. And if they inherited the knowledge, from whom did they receive it? The Templars are one theory. The knightly order that amassed wealth and esoteric learning before their suppression. The Freemasons are another. The fraternity of builders whose lodges preserved architectural secrets across generations. But these are surface answers. They push the question back one layer without resolving it. Behind the Templars, behind the Masons, there must have been an earlier source. A civilization or network that understood advanced geometry, ballistics, earth engineering, and large-scale project coordination. A civilization that history has erased. The geographic clustering of star forts reveals another pattern. They concentrate along coastlines, rivers, and mountain passes, not merely to defend territory, but to control trade routes and resource flows. The Dutch star forts in the East Indies protected spice monopolies. The Spanish forts in the Americas guarded silver shipment routes. The French forts along the Rhine and the Alps secured borders, but also controlled commerce. The forts were not just military assets. They were economic infrastructure. They regulated movement, taxed goods, and enforced monopolies. This suggests that their builders understood geopolitics in modern terms, thinking not of kingdoms and dynasties, but of global systems of extraction and control. The star fort network begins to look like an early prototype of what would later become colonial infrastructure, a grid of control points designed to dominate resources and populations. And if that is true, then the question becomes, who benefited? The kings and emperors who commissioned the forts, or the unseen architects who designed the system they served? The suppression of alternative construction methods is telling. Before the star fort era, fortification design varied wildly by region and culture. Castles reflected local materials, terrain, and tactical traditions. But as star forts spread, this diversity collapsed. Indigenous fortification systems, the hill forts of Celtic Europe, the earthwork enclosures of pre-Columbian America, the stone citadels of sub-Saharan Africa, were systematically replaced or incorporated into the star geometry. This was not evolution. This was replacement. A global architectural monoculture imposed over regional traditions. The speed and thoroughness of this replacement suggest deliberate policy, a centralized agenda to standardize fortification design worldwide. Who had the authority to enforce such a policy? No single monarch commanded global reach. No known institution possessed the combination of military, economic, and intellectual power to coordinate such a transformation. Yet it happened. The diversity vanished. The star prevailed. And with it, a single architectural philosophy became the default language of power across the planet. The teaching of fortification engineering became formalized in military academies during the 17th century. These institutions trained officers in the principles of siege warfare and defensive design. But the curriculum was standardized. Students in Paris learned the same geometric principles as students in Madrid or Vienna. The textbooks were identical, the exercises identical. This educational uniformity reinforced the architectural uniformity, but it also reveals something else. The knowledge was being preserved and transmitted through institutional channels, not through independent innovation. The academies were not laboratories of experimentation. They were conservatories of established doctrine. They existed to perpetuate a system, not to question it. And the system they perpetuated was the Star Fort doctrine. A doctrine that appeared complete, final, and unchallengeable. No alternative designs were explored. No competing theories were entertained. The Star Fort was presented as the inevitable solution to the problem of modern warfare. But inevitability is a narrative construction. It obscures the choices that were made, the alternatives that were suppressed, and the interests that were served by those choices. The silence of historians is not accidental. Academic consensus treats star forts as a solved problem. Renaissance military response to gunpowder artillery. The explanation is neat. It is teachable. It fits within the established narrative of European technological ascendancy. To question it is to pull a thread that unravels larger historical assumptions. If the Star Fort system was not invented by European engineers, then European history is incomplete. If the knowledge came from an external or hidden source, then the rise of the West was not an independent development, but the appropriation of older expertise. This is not a comfortable thesis. It implies continuity where we have been taught rupture. It implies shadowy continuities of power that transcend the visible rise and fall of empires. And so the question is avoided. The forts are catalogued, measured, restored, and turned into tourist sites. But the deeper inquiry, the question of origin, of the minds behind the geometry, remains unasked in mainstream scholarship. It is left to fringe researchers, to independent investigators willing to risk credibility. And yet, the forts remain. Their angles do not lie. Their mathematics do not permit soft conclusions. The technology encoded in star forts includes principles that would not be independently rediscovered until the industrial age. The use of interlocking fields of fire is a concept formalized in modern warfare. The earth-moving logistics resemble contemporary civil engineering projects. The acoustic properties suggest knowledge of wave mechanics. The symbolic geometry aligns with Hermetic traditions that claim descent from ancient mystery schools. Every layer of analysis points toward a source of knowledge older, more sophisticated, and more globally interconnected than the historical narrative allows. The forts themselves are evidence. They are proof that in the 16th and 17th centuries, someone possessed the expertise to plan and execute a planetary fortification network. The official story names a few engineers and assigns them genius. But genius does not explain uniformity. Genius does not explain the sudden, simultaneous emergence of an architectural system across continents. Genius does not explain the financial, logistical, and organizational capacity required. What explains it is infrastructure. A hidden infrastructure of knowledge, wealth, and coordination that operated behind the visible surface of history. An infrastructure that built the forts not as isolated defenses, but as components of a system. a system that may still be operating, reconfigured but unbroken, in the architecture of power we inhabit today. The destruction of star forts tells its own story. Many were demolished not by siege or warfare, but by political decree. After the Congress of Vienna in 1815, dozens of fortifications across Europe were systematically dismantled as part of treaty agreements. The official reason was to reduce military tensions and prevent future conflicts. But the timing is curious. The Napoleonic Wars had just ended, wars that demonstrated the continued effectiveness of fortified positions. Why dismantle proven defensive infrastructure? The demolition orders targeted specific forts, particularly those in strategic locations that controlled trade routes and resource corridors. The pattern suggests that the forts were being removed not because they were obsolete, but because they represented a form of power that the emerging order wanted to eliminate. The post-Vienna world was moving towards centralized nation-states, professional standing armies, and industrialized warfare. The Star Fort belonged to an older paradigm, a decentralized, regionally autonomous system of control. Its removal was not military strategy. It was political housecleaning, the erasure of physical evidence from a previous era of power. The star forts are still there. You can visit them. You can walk their ramparts and trace their angles. You can stand in the center and listen to the acoustics. You can measure the geometry and confirm the mathematical precision. The evidence is not hidden. It is hiding in plain sight, waiting for those willing to see beyond the official explanations. The question is not whether the forts are anomalies. They are. The question is whether we have the courage to confront what those anomalies imply. That history is not a transparent record, but a constructed narrative. That the rise of modern civilization was not a spontaneous flowering of European genius, but the visible expression of invisible forces. That the architects of our world are not the names in textbooks, but the shadows behind them. The hands that guided the compass and the minds that encoded ancient knowledge into the geometry of control. The star forts are their signature, and the refusal to ask who really designed them is the measure of how completely their secret has been kept.